Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be creating a fun application. We're going to be creating a URL shortener with .NET 7 minimal APIs. We're going to be creating the application basics, which is going to be taking a long URL and converting it to a short one, and basically capturing all of the short URL requests and basically redirecting them back to the actual long version of the URL. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. It will really help the channel. As well, if you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. Now, grab your cup of coffee and let's get started. So before we get started, we're going to be discussing what is a URL shortener and how does it work? What are the functionality that we're going to be implementing inside our application for it to work? And for that, we're going to be going to draw.io, where we're going to be actually illustrating this process. So first things first, as we can see here that I have an empty canvas. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be just zooming in a bit. And basically a URL shortener is something like that. So let's imagine we have a long URL. So let's go, for example, to amazon.com, amazon.co.uk, and let's look for, I don't know, cameras. And you can see here we have different options, for example. Let's, for example, choose... let's choose a GoPro, for example. If we click on this, and out of the bat, if we're just going to be looking at the URL, we can see in order for us to go to this GoPro, we can see that we have all of this long URL. Basically, all of this can be removed because it's all basically for tracking purposes. But the main URL, in order for us to get to this page, is going to be something like that. And let's copy it here so we can take a look at it in more details. So let's see how this looks. Let's make this a bit bigger. Okay, I think that should be fine. So this is basically the URL in order for us to go to that direct product inside Amazon. So we can see here that we have www.amazon.co.uk, then we have the name of the product, GoPro Hero 11 Black Waterproof Stabilization, then /DP, and then / some random code. And we can see this is a very long text in order for us to utilize. So what URL shortener comes here and actually does is basically having something like this. It's basically taking this entire URL and basically making it short, as the name suggests. So for example, instead of having it like this, it could be something like this, for example. A123 V12, for example. And so for example, what we can do is, and this can be even shorter, and that's a different story. For now, we can make it something like SRT, for example, .co, and something like this. So what happened here is we have basically mapped this long URL to this short URL, and basically whenever someone tries to go to this URL, it will basically direct them to this long URL. So you might think to yourself, why do I need this? Why do I want to have a short URL rather than the normal long URL that we have? And there's multiple reasons to why do you want to have that. So for example, let's take the first example, which is Twitter. Twitter, for example, only limits you for the number of characters that you can actually utilize within a tweet. So the better, more optimized your URL, which is the better, the more text you can actually input in your tweet. Second of all, if you're actually creating some embed code, and actually when it comes to embedding code, sometimes you can have limitation on the number of text that you can actually input. So that's another reason. Sometimes a long URL can have some ASCII characters inside of it that when you try to putting it from one place to another, it will not allow to have this ASCII character inside of it. So utilizing a URL shortener, that will help as well. And on top of all of that, it just looks much more better structured to have a shorter URL if you want to share it with someone, if you want to actually send it to someone, and basically having utilized a URL which is for example, 15 characters long, 20 characters long, rather than having it 100 or 150 characters long. And here you can see that the main difference is much more visually easier for the user to read and actually utilize rather than having a long URL. And that's why it's very important for us to actually have a URL shortener when it comes to actually work on our database. You can create your own, and that's what we're actually doing here in this video. So that's the reason. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be creating a minimal API. Just put API here. And this is the API. that we're going to be creating, the minimal API actually. So let's make it as minimal. Let's put here minimal API so we know exactly what we're building. And basically what we're going to be doing is a request, it's going to come in. So we're going to, a user, let's put a user here. And a user is going to send a request to our API with this long URL. It's going to say, please API, I want to shorten my URL. So here it's going to be sending a request. So the API is going to do the following. So first things first, it's going to actually validate that it's a valid URL. And then once it validates an actual URL, let's copy this. It's going to create a shorter version of the URL. Okay, and once it creates a short version of the URL, the next step is we're gonna map the short version to the long version of the URL. And then we're gonna store it, and we're gonna be utilizing SQLite for this. Store the mapping, which is basically mapping the short to the long one. And then lastly, we're gonna return back to the user. And after all of that is finished, we can just create another arrow. And this is gonna be from our minimal API back to the user with the response. And that's basically it. So a user, it's not an actor, so we put a user. The user will send a request to our minimal API. Once it actually received our minimal API, our application will validate it, make sure it's a valid URL. If not, it's going to send a bad request. Then once the validation is done, it's going to create a shorter URL. Then we're going to do a mapping where we're going to store all of this information inside our SQLite, and then we're going to be returning this information back to the user. So now that we have actually explained what is a what is a URL shortener, let's get started and actually create our application. So first, let's open our terminal. And inside our terminal, what we're going to be doing is first we need to check that we are on the latest version of the .NET framework. So we're going to put .NET -- version. And we can see here that we are on the latest version, which is 7.0.101 by the time of this recording. And now we're going to be creating our application. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing the .NET SDK in order for us to create our application. So we're going to put .NET new web API -minimal because we wanted a minimal API. And we're going to give it a name, and we're going to call it URL short. And now we can see that it has been created successfully. And we're going to be utilizing a JetBrains Rider in order for us to actually utilize it as our IDE in order for us to create our application. So let's open Rider. And let's go to Open. Let's go to Desktop, Work, Learning, .NET, Fun, URL short. And we can see here that our application is loading. Perfect. And because this is a minimal web API, as we can see here, we don't have any controllers, we don't have any www root, we don't have anything. All we do have is our program.cs, which is exactly what we want. So when we create a new application, a lot of boilerplate code gets added with it. So let's clean this up. So we don't need this, so let's delete this. We don't need any of this. Let's delete these. Do we need this? We don't need this. Well, actually, let's keep the swashbuckle, or basically the open API, in order for us to actually utilize it, utilize Swagger in order for us to interact with this. We don't need this. Let's remove it. So now we can see that we have around 16 lines of code instead of the 45, which it came out directly when we created it. We can make this up to 3 lines. That's fine. This is that should be sufficient for now. So once we have done all of that, let's actually start adding some of the packages. And the packages that we want to add to this application is basically the SQLite packages in order for us to actually store the mappings between the short URL and the long URL into our database. So to do that, all we need to do is put .net, .add, package, and we're going to put Microsoft.entity framework core.SQLite. So that's the first package. Perfect. The second one is going to be .net add package Microsoft.entity framework core.design. Perfect. And to verify that these have been added successfully, let's go to edit and let's see our CS proj. And as we can see here, we have both of our packages have been installed and on the latest version 7.0.1. Perfect. So once we have done all of that, the next step is we're going to go to our app settings, and inside our app settings we're going to be adding our connection string that we're going to be utilizing. So here we're going to put connection strings, and we're just going to put the default connection, and we're just going to make it simply data source equal app.db. It's a very simple application database that's going to be created alongside our application here. Perfect. So once we have done all of that, let's just do a quick .NET build. And we can see our application has been built successfully. Next, we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a new folder, which is going to be where we're going to be storing all of our model. So we're going to put add directory, and we're just going to call it models. And inside our models, we're going to be adding the first class, and this is going to be the entity that we're going to be utilizing in order for us to create our database table. So for example, here what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a table. We're going to call it URLs. We can call it whatever we want. And there's inside this table, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be mapping the long URL with the short URL. And it's going to be, let's call it just URLs. Actually, let's call it short URL. We can call it whatever we want, to be fair. And here it's going to be very simple model. We're going to just have 3 items. So the first one's going to be the ID. The second one is going to be a string, which is going to be the normal URL. And the last one is going to be also a string, which is going to be the short URL. Very simple. We can add much more stuff to it, but again, okay, we have, so let's call it compact URL. Yeah, because we already called the class actually short URL. Actually, let's change short URL to URL management. Yeah, something like that. And let's keep this as short URL. Okay, and let's change the name of, let's change the name of this. So edit, rename. Okay. Let's save this. Let's just do a build to make sure everything is still working. Okay, great. Okay, let's make this like this. Maybe we get rid of these warnings. Doesn't really matter, but okay, fine. So once we have done all of that, the next we're gonna add a DTO. And basically, in order for us to, why do we need a DTO? And basically, the reason that we're adding a DTO here is basically this is going to be the request that the user is going to be sending us. And instead of sending it directly as the query string, it's better to send it as a body of the request. And for this, we're going to be creating a DTO, as simple as that. And the DTO here is basically stand to data transfer object, which is going to be like a very minimal object that the user needs to provide for the application. So let's create a new class, and we're gonna call this URL DTO. Actually, we can make this a record, but for simplicity's sake, we're just utilizing it as a class. And let's only have here, which is gonna be a property, string, and we're just gonna have it as URL. And we're gonna also have last DTO, which is gonna be the response that we're gonna be sending back to the user, and we're gonna put call it response URL short response DTO, and basically here we're just gonna also return it prop string, and here we're gonna put URL. It's very simple. So once we have creating these three objects, let's do build. I think here is gonna give us those warnings, so let's just fix this like this. Let's fix this here, fix this here. Okay, perfect. Now let's do .NET build. Okay, perfect. Now that we have created our models, the next step for us is we need to actually create our DBContext. And basically here, we're utilizing Entity Framework Core in order for us to communicate with our database. And to do that, we need to something called a DBContext, which is gonna be the management layer of our application, of our database within our application. So we're gonna be utilizing this DBContext in order for us to send the request to the database and to store stuff there, and actually to be able to retrieve stuff out of the database. So, let's start here. We're gonna put a class. We're just gonna call it API DBContext, and we're gonna inherit from the DBContext class. And this DBContext class, it was provided for us when we installed our packages. And here, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna make the autocomplete, and we're gonna make it public, and then we're gonna make it virtual. We're gonna have the DB set. And we're just gonna make it as a URL management, which is gonna be the table name, and we're gonna basically call it URLs. Very simple. And once we have done that, this is gonna be basically mapping our model here to a table inside our database, which is gonna be called URLs. And here what we're gonna be doing is we're just gonna have the constructor. So all we need to do here is pass the options, and it's gonna be DBContext options. And we're gonna pass the API context, and here we're just gonna say it's options. And no matter the options that we have, we're gonna pass it to the base, and we'll make sure that it's there. So basically what we're doing here is once we initialize our constructor, we're basically taking whatever options that we're utilizing to initialize this DBContext, and we're passing it to the class that we are inheriting from in order for it to do all of the it's gonna do all of the wiring in order for us to be actually able to make our API DBContext work. So that's all the work that we're gonna be doing inside our API DBContext. We're not gonna be delving more into that. So once that is done, the next step is we need to actually get our connection string here. And once we get our connection string, we're gonna be actually configuring our API DBContext. We're basically gonna tell the minimal API that we're having an API DBContext here, or we're gonna be actually connecting to a database. And because we are connecting to a database, what it needs to do is basically it needs to take those configuration and initialize it, so we can actually utilize these database connection inside our actions that we're going to be creating. And that will allow actually to have our API DBContext embedded inside our DI container. If you don't know anything about dependency injection, I have another video somewhere where I'm going to be linking here, where you can actually go and watch that, where I explain dependency injection in much more detail. It's not directly to minimal API, but basically once you understand the concept of it, it will basically be you can actually utilize it with any .NET application. So the next step right now is we're going to be getting the connection string, and then once we get the connection string, we're going to be actually injecting it into our application. So let's do it here before we actually build it. We're going to put var connection string, and we're going to utilize the builder dot configuration dot get connection string. And we're gonna just utilize, I think we call it default connection. Yeah, let's take this. And this basically will allow us to have access to our connection string. And once we have done all of that, the next step for us is we need to embed it. So we're gonna put builder.services.dbContext. And here we're gonna say it's the API DBContext. And then we need to specify the options, and here basically whatever options we put here, they're gonna be embedded inside our constructor here. So basically we are initializing our API DBContext, and all I'm gonna put here is basically options, and then we're gonna put options.SQLite use SQLite, and we're gonna pass the connection string. As simple as that. And here, let's do a quick summary. So what we did is first we got the connection string. We basically went into our services so we can actually add this to our DI container. And then we said, okay, we want to add a DBContext in order for it to utilize the database. Then we specified which DBContext we want, which is this one here. And then we passed we told this DBContext that you need to utilize SQLite. If we're utilizing SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, we changed this to utilize those. And then basically what we did is we have basically just passed the connection string. So let's do a quick .NET build to make sure that everything is working. .NET build. Okay, great. So once we have done all of that, the next step is we need to actually create our database, because right now we have an application, we have our DBContext there, and we have our table, but we don't have the actual database. So Entity Framework makes this really easy for us. So what we can do is we can just utilize some commands that Entity Framework provide us in order for us to actually create this database. And we're going to be basically first creating a migration, which basically it's a script that converts the C# code into SQL files. And then once we do all of that, we're going to be actually utilizing that script that converts the C# to SQL into creating the database. It's very easy, 2 lines of code inside our terminal, which will create everything for us. So let's see how that's done. So inside our terminal, we're going to put .NET EF, which stands for Entity Framework. And we're gonna go to migrations, and then we're gonna put add, and then we're gonna basically we're gonna call it initial migration. And now we're gonna see here that we're gonna have a new folder added, which is called migrations. And this folder here, basically, it's gonna have the structure of our folder. So we can see it has the create table, it named it URLs, we can see all of the columns here, we can see that it provides the primary key, and all of that has been created for us automatically by Entity Framework. We do not have to do any of this. And basically what we can see here, let's copy this, copy, where is the copy URL? Oops, let's copy the URL, and let's go back to our web browser. So if you are wondering how we can actually get this, basically what you need to do is you need to install the EF tool. So because I have already installed it, if you don't have it already, you need to do .NET tool install --global.net-ef. But because I have already installed it, I'm just gonna update it right now. So I'm gonna copy this, and I'm gonna go back here and just do this so I can update to the latest version. And now we can see it's updated. But for you, what you need to do is you need to install, and you can see it's already installed. But basically it's .NET tool install --global.net-ef, which will allow you to have access to Entity Framework through your terminal. Okay, so once we have done all of that, the next step is we need to actually implement this migration to create our database. And for that, we're gonna put .NET EF database update, as simple as that. And what's that's gonna do right now is gonna actually just connect to our application, and basically it's gonna see what's the connection string that we have provided. It's gonna check if the database exists or not. If it does not exist, it's gonna go and implement all of the migration to create it. If it doesn't exist, it's gonna actually check if all of the migration that we have is actually implemented inside the database or not. If it doesn't, it will implement it. If everything is implemented, it's not gonna do anything. And it's a very smart system. So right now here, we can see that it has run successfully, and we can see that we have a new file which is popped up, which is called app.db, which is going to be our application. So let's open this up, and let's just do task connection. Okay, we have succeeded. And now we can see here that inside my app, let's do a refresh. And now if I open this, we have 4 tables, and we can see here that I have my URLs table, and it has basically the ID, the URL, and the short URL. Perfect. And all of that has been created for me through Entity Framework. I did not have to do any extra work to get this. All I did is just basically utilize some C# code in order for me to get to this point. So now that we have basically created all of the we create all of the foundation for our URL shortener, now it's gonna come to the nice part where we can actually implement the logic behind the URL shortener, where we're gonna be actually taking the request from the user and basically go through all of the steps to validating, mapping it, storing it, and then returning back the response. So let's do this right now. So we're gonna go back to our program.cs, and let's add it here before the app.run. So what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna put app.post.map post, and basically what we're gonna be doing here is whenever a user goes to /short URL, basically within this path we're gonna be actually creating the logic that whenever a user posts to the short URL, they're going to be actually able to get a shorter version of the URL than the URL they shared with us. And for that, we're going to be doing is we're going to utilize the async method here, and we're going to basically creating a delegate function, and we're going to be able to basically propagate it from there. So we're going to utilize first the URL DTO that we have created previously, and this URL DTO is basically gonna be where the users will be able to share with us the long URL that they have. So I'm just gonna call it URL, and then okay, let me fix this references here. Okay, let's fix it later. URL DTO. Okay, we'll fix it later. Let's put the API DBContext that we want, and I want to actually, we're just gonna call it DB. Oops. DB. And then I want here to have the HTTP context available for me as well. And I'm gonna call it CTX. Okay. And then once that is done, I have this available for me, and I'm gonna close this, and I'm just gonna make this a bit smaller. Let me go and check if this is looking good. Okay, let's make this a bit smaller. Okay, yeah, I think that should be looking fine. Maybe you can increase the font a bit. Yeah, I think that should be fine. Let's make this a bit smaller. Okay. So basically here what I have, as we said, we are making a post request, and whenever a post to short URL is available, we're gonna be basically creating the logic here. And basically what we're doing is we're taking the URL DTO, which is the user gonna be sending, we are injecting our API DB context to this request, and we are utilizing the HTTP context in order for us to build the response. So first of all, we need to check if it's a valid URL or not. So we're gonna put if not URI dot try to create, which is basically we're gonna take the string that the user has provided for us inside our DTO, and we're gonna try to convert it to a URI. If it actually converts to a URI, it means that this is a valid URL that we can actually shorten. If it's not a valid URL, we're gonna send that to the user back. This is a bad request, invalid URL has been provided. So we're gonna pass the URL, and then we're gonna put the kind of the URL kind. I think it's called kind. Right? Oh, sorry, it has to be inside. URL kind. This is a URI kind obsolete, and then we're gonna pass the out var. We're gonna say input URL. Let's remove this. So if this is valid, if this is not valid, we're gonna be returning results dot bad request, and we're gonna say invalid URL has been provided. So that's if it's an invalid URL. If it's a valid URL, what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna start here. Let's add commands so we know exactly what we're doing. So here we're gonna be validating the input URL. Then what we're doing is we're gonna be basically creating a short version of the provided URL, and for that we're gonna be utilizing some random number generation. There's multiple ways. This is just for demo's sake. We're gonna utilize the random function, so we're gonna put var random equal new random, and then what we're gonna be doing is gonna put var actually, let's put it as const string, and we're gonna put chars equal a b c d e f g h a g k l m n o p q r s t u v w x y z, and then 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. Okay, we can add more special characters. Let's add the lowercase. We can do whatever we want. I think that should be enough for now. And basically what we're doing is we're taking these sets of random characters in order for us to create a random URL, and this random URL, or basically a random string, and this random string is going to be utilized to map it to the long URL. So once we have done all of that, we'll now utilize the random function. So I'm just going to put var random string equal new string, and here I'm just going to utilize the enumerable dot repeat, and I'm gonna utilize that char, and I say I want to have 8 random characters, and then once I do that, all I'm gonna say is dot select, and here so we have put dot select x dot random dot next, and then we're gonna put x dot length, and then once we have dot all of that, we'll put dot to array, and that should be it. So basically here what we're doing is we're creating a new string, and then basically and we're taking 8 characters from this string that we have here, and then we're basically creating a random based on the length of this, and then once that's that, we're putting it in an array. It's very simple, straightforward. There's multiple ways we can create random ones. This happens to be the one that I am utilizing right now. And then once that is done, we're going to be creating an object. So I'm going to call it as URL equal new URL management. And here all I'm going to be doing, all I'm going to be doing is I'm going to actually add the URL. So this is going to be the original URL. So url.item.url, and the next one is going to be the short URL. And the way that I'm going to be adding this, I'm just going to add the random string that I have, random str, and basically right now we can see that my long URL is actually being mapped to the random string that I have just generated here. So once I have done all of that, the next is I'm going to utilizing my API DBContext.urls to add this, and I'm going to add the SURL to it, and then I'm going to put db.urls .save changes async. And that what's happening here is basically I'm mapping the short URL with the long one. And here I'm just saving it to my database. Saving the mapping to the DB. Okay, once that is done, what we need to do is we need to return the response back to the user. And the way we do that is we need to construct a URL with this short URL string that we have. And now we're gonna just put construct URL. And it's gonna be very simple. So first things first, we're gonna put var response, or let's just put result equal, let's use string concatenation, and here we're going to be utilizing our HTTP context, so ctx dot request dot scheme. So that's the first thing, and then if it's HTTP, if it's HTTPS, we're going to take whatever the service has provided, and then we're going to create another one. We're going to put ctx dot request dot host, or whatever the host that we are currently utilizing. If it's a short domain, long domain, whatever host that we have there, it will work. And then once we have that, we're gonna be basically adding the new one, which is gonna be the SURL dot short URL. As simple as that. And finally, we need to return this back to the user. So we're gonna put var, actually we're gonna put return results dot, not result, results dot okay, and here we're gonna return a new object, which is gonna be the URL short response CTO. And here all we're gonna be passing back is the short URL, and I'm gonna put result. Perfect. And this should be it for the first part of our URL shortener. So let's do a .NET build. Okay, great. That are fine. Now let's do .NET run. Actually, let's run it from here. Okay, it's building, and let's open it up in our web browser. So let's go back to our web browser, and let's put it here. And let me zoom in a bit. Let's see if this looks good. Okay, perfect. So what I'm gonna be doing right now, I'm gonna utilize this, and I'm gonna click try it out. And I'm just gonna take the same long URL that I have here, and I'm just gonna paste it here, and I'm gonna see execute. And basically what I got here is I got 200, which means that it has been successful, and this is the short URL that I got. So if we compare these two, we can see that this short URL is much more better, or basically much more user-friendly or easier to share than this long one, which is great. Now, this leads us to the second part of our project, which basically right now, if I go to my web browser and click on this, it does not take me anywhere because I did not create the logic where I can handle or actually take this code and actually map it out or redirect the user to the actual website. So let's do this right now. So before jumping into the code, we're just going to illustrate the functionality that's kind of happening whenever a user utilizes one of those short URLs, what's going to happen inside our API before we actually redirect them. So if we come here, let's build on this. So this is the first request that the user has sent and got their short URL. Now let's see the second request that's going to happen. So let's copy these. Let's put it down like this. Okay, and this is going to be the second response where the user here send the short URL. Let's make this a bit bigger. Okay, more bigger. Okay. So what happened right now? Let's make this a bit higher. So here the user have sent the short URL, and we want basically to be redirected to the actual website. So what happens here? So first of all, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be validating the URL similar to what we have done before. Then we're going to be breaking down. Actually, let's delete all of that and we can fill them again. We're going to be breaking down the URL that the user have shared. Breaking down the URL and getting the unique part, which is going to be the random string. So once we got the random string from that URL, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking inside our database or searching our database for a match. If we find a match, we're going to be redirecting back the user. So we're going to put redirect. If match found, we redirect. Else bad request. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. Once the user send us a short URL, we're going to be validating it. Then we're going to break it down to take the random part of it. Then we're going to be searching our database to find a match based on that random part. And then if we find it, we're going to be redirecting them. If they don't find it, we're going to be basically sending them a bad request. So once we have understood that this process, let's go back to our rider. And here we're going to be starting adding the next part. So, and this leads us to a bit of a more complicated part. So if you look here, what we have done here is we have mapped the post to a specific URL. But when we are creating a random URL generator, we're going to have different code that attached to our URL. And we cannot really predict what is the path for it because it's random. And because it's random, we need to find a way where we can actually catch any single URL that we might find that does not match to our current implementation, or basically the current path that we have provided. And if that URL does not match any of the provided, we can actually just capture it through this random or catch all method. And once we capture it, we can actually execute some logic. Because for example, here we just created one URL which gave us this random code of 8 characters, another URL, another 8, another URL, another 8. And that you can see here that it's very, very hard to actually predict what types of mapping that we need to do. So that's why we need to create like a catch-all that's going to be responsible for capturing any request that does not map to any of the current mapping that we currently have. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to see it in practice right now. So here what we're going to be doing, so before with that, the only mapping that we currently have is / short URL for a post. But for everything else, we don't have any mapping, to be fair. So right now what we're going to be creating a catch-all, which no matter what is the information, as long as it does not match short.url, it's going to capture it. So after this, we're going to be creating it here, and we're going to put app map fallback. And basically here, the map fallback, it means that if it does not match to any of the previous mappings that we have here, which is in our case short URL, it's going to be captured by this map here. And for this, all we're going to put is we're going to just create the handler, and we're going to utilize the DBContext, and we're going to be utilizing the we're going to be utilizing the HTTP context as well. And that's it. So here what we're doing is basically, no matter what's the response, no matter what's the mapping is, as long as it does not match with the previous one, we're catching it here, and we're actually utilizing the DB context and the context to do all of the logics. So first one, we're gonna get the path, which is basically the URL, which has been that hit this mapping, and it's gonna be equal to ctx dot request dot path to URI component. And basically what I'm gonna be doing is .trim, and I'm gonna be removing everything before the /. So what means here, if we take a look back into our web browser, the short URL that has been generated for us, we can see it has HTTP column / localhost and then / our random code. So what we're going to be doing here is we're taking this URL that has been shared, and we're ignoring everything previously to the / and we're just taking the code. So it makes it much more easier for us to have directly the code rather than going through multiple lines in order for us to trim that URL to that simple code. So once that is done, we're going to actually look for a match. So we're gonna put URL match equal. We're gonna utilize the database here, so db.urls.first or default async, and we're gonna be matching it on that URL itself. And we can put x.short_url.lower.trim equal to path to lower.trim. And basically here what we're doing is, let's make this on a new line so it's a bit more easier to read. Let's see how it looks. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're taking, so for example right now, let's go back here. Oh, that will create an issue. So that to lower, because we need to make it exact matching. So let's remove that to lower. Okay. So we're just removing any extra spaces. So what we're doing is we're taking the short URL that we currently have, and we're trimming it, and we're making sure it matches any of the short URL. So if URL match is null, we can just return results.bad request, and we'll say invalid URL or invalid matching or invalid URL. Invalid short URL. And in case everything is fine and everything is working, what we can do is we just need to redirect the user, and it's very simple. We're gonna put return results.redirect, and I'm just gonna return the URL URL match dot URL, and here yeah, that's it. That's all we need to do. So let's see what happened here. We took the incoming URL, we actually mapped it out to try to search within our current URL if it exists or not. If it does not exist, we return invalid. Let's put invalid request. It's easier. And then if it does exist, we just redirect it to it. So let's stop this and let's try again. So debug. Okay, it's running now. Let's go back to our web browser. And now let's try to take this URL and put it inside our browser, see if it will actually take us to the Amazon portal. So right now we can see here, I'm just pasting it here. And we can see it directly took me to the portal itself. So let's try it again. So let me try different products. Let's try let's try these ones, for example, some random kit on Amazon. So let's take this. Let's go here and let's shorten up this URL. And let's click execute, and we got this short URL here. Let's take this and let's come here and run it, and basically we were able to get through. Perfect. So here we can see that our simple web API, a minimal web API, let's take a look at it. I think it's gonna be what, 74 lines of code. Within this 74 lines of code, we were able to basically create a full URL shortener application, full functionality. Still, it needs a lot of work to make it more efficient, but in essence, we got the MVP actually available, the minimal viable product, which is basically creating a short URL and mapping them. And we can see here that we are actually able to create all of this logic directly within a single file, which is our program.cs, and basically we were able to contain everything that we have created here into a single application, because basically minimal APIs do not rely on having a controllers, does not rely on having a different MVC implementation. All we have here is basically we created some models, we put them somewhere else, and basically we're able to create a full minimal API, which basically replicate or basically create a full shorten URL application for us here. So basically, let's do a quick summary of what we have created. We basically created an application which take a long URL and basically trim it down to a very short URL, and whenever this short URL is being utilized by a browser, it will basically map it out to the long URL and redirect the user there. And we have, as we have mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is multiple benefits of why do we need to use that, or why do we want to implement that, and that's a different story, but this implementation here will show you the power of minimal APIs. It shows you the flexibility that it provides for us, and basically it shows you the power that we can actually utilize within minimal APIs, and how with with a short amount of code we are able to actually this strong functionality. We are able to create this strong functionalities. So an extra feature that we want to add, for example, is we might want to add analytics, we might want to add tracking, we might want to add, for example, more of customized URL for different users. We can actually create much more functionalities, but this one is just to create the very minimum functionality of a URL shortener. If you're interested in actually me creating all of those extra functionalities, please comment down below, and we'll create much more in-depth implementation, or we'll build on top of this implementation to create much more interesting functionalities to our URL shortener. I hope this video was helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. It will really help the channel. I also would like to wish you a happy new year, and hopefully the new year will be full of success and joy and happiness to you and your families. And lastly, if you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. And thank you very much for this wonderful year. And yeah, thank you very much, and see you next year.